Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Zoom meeting. It's a pleasure to see so many people on the call this morning. Again, it's always a pleasure to have Gov on visit our association and give us up-to-date, legal information. Today, we're going to be discussing the COVID-19 forms. I do want to mention that any questions that you may have, please utilize the chat feature, and we will go ahead and answer those questions according to how they're submitted. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Gov. Welcome, Gov. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. So what are we having for lunch today? Oh, yeah, no lunch, right? That used to be the best things about these meetings was the lunch, but okay. Good to see you anyway. I just want to tell you, the legal world in COVID-19, okay? It's not going to last forever, but while we're in it, we got to change our ways legally. So I'm going to talk about that today, okay? Mainly talk about forms, but I'll talk about other things too. The first thing to remember, of course, is in California, real estate is an essential business, of course, so that's good. But that does not mean we can do whatever we want to do like we used to. There are rules now that we have to follow during the state of emergency that we're in. And in other words, your essential service as long as you follow the rules. So we turn these rules into this document called Best Practices in COVID-19, which is on your website. But to really make it easy for you, we turn these rules into forms. So if you do the forms, you're following the rules. If you're following the rules, you're in good shape. You don't get sued. Your clients have to indemnify you if you get sued because they screwed up, and your errors and omissions insurance covers you. If you don't follow the rules, you can get sued, your clients don't have to indemnify you, and your E&O will not cover you. So it's real important to follow the rules, right? Okay. So what forms am I talking about? Well, the first form you should all be using, I hope, is when you take a listing, or if you already got a listing, make the seller sign this coronavirus addendum. It's called the RLA CAA. That stands for Residential Listing Agreement. The CAA stands for Coronavirus Addendum or Amendment. Remember, if it's part of the original listing, it's an addendum. If you get it signed after you already took the listing, it's an amendment. Either way, it's the same form. So when the seller signs this form, the seller is promising to you, the listing agent, that they're going to follow the rules. And it says right on the form, if they don't follow the rules, they're going against your advice, and they have to indemnify you if there's any lawsuits that come out of this. So you see how it protects you very much? So please have your sellers sign the RLA CAA form when you take a listing. On this form, the seller says, I'm going to follow the best practices, including certain things. It says, the seller is saying, I'm not going to let anyone onto my property unless they promise to follow best practices. In fact, I'm going to require them to sign a form called the PEAD, which I'm going to talk about in a second. The seller is also promising, when they sign this listing, that not only that they understand that you told them what the rules are, they're going to follow the rules, they indemnify you if you don't follow the rules, but they also are promising that it's not your job, the listing agent, to be the police. It's not your job to enforce these rules. It's your job to tell everybody what the rules are and make a best effort that they get enforced, okay? So there's the form, thank you, and that you're going to get everybody to sign. You can see, number one, the seller agrees to allow showings. Some sellers don't want to allow showings. Number two, they're agreeing which marketing activities they're going to allow. Maybe they're going to have staging, maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to have virtual tours, whatever. And then number three, it's all or nothing, right? I mean, are they going to allow all these inspections or not? All of these inspections are okay, but sometimes you'll come across a seller who says, I don't want to do it. I'm scared. I don't want these people in my property. So it basically says on this form, if the seller's not going to allow these things, they understand that that's going to interfere with their ability to sell the property, and it may have a negative impact on their ability to sell the property. But the bottom line is you can do these things, which is good, because in some parts of California, you can't even show properties that are occupied. You can only show vacant property. Anyway, so this form protects you, and it gets the seller agrees, you and the seller agree what's going on here, and that it's very important, okay? Now, you see in number 1 there, property showings, it says sellers advised, broker has provided seller with this PEAD form. You've already, in other words, you give them this form and they're gonna sign it. The seller is promising to follow the rules, and they're promising to sign the PEAD form. But the real important people to sign the PEAD form are the buyers. So in other words, the seller is promising that anytime anyone enters the property, before they enter the property, they're going to sign the PEAD form, okay? And we got one for sales and we got one for rentals. It's pretty much the same form. So the form you just looked at, the form you're just looking at now, the listing addendum, that's for sale listings or lease listings. The next form we're going to look at is the PEAD, and waiting for Annette to click on. There she goes. Way to go, Annette. Thank you. Now there's a form, there's one of these for rentals and sales. It's pretty much the same form, right? This is the form that anyone who enters the property is going to sign. And they're basically saying they understand the rules, they're going to follow the rules. They understand that the seller is allowing them to enter the property. And you see on number 6, there's when the seller signs this, right? Because the seller's going to sign their own and the buyer's going to sign their own. Now, when the seller signs it, what are they saying? The seller's saying, I'm allowing you to enter, and I'm also advising you who's entering the property that I have cleaned the property. I'm going to clean the property after each viewing, each showing. That doesn't mean a full-fledged house cleaning. You know what it means? It means you're going to wipe down any of the surfaces that have been touched. And hopefully there aren't going to be any surfaces that are touched, right? Because look at number 6 there. That's what the people who are entering the property. So in other words, the seller signs this form, listing agent signs this form, but then the buyer signs this form also, and the buyer's agent signs this form. Why are they signing? Because they're saying, I promise when I enter this property, I'm going to follow the rules. So you can scroll back down again. Annette, thank you very much. Look at number 6 there. So they're promising to follow the rules, and they're promising to take care of themselves. And they're promising to wash their hands, wear gloves, wear protective shoe coverings. People always tell me, what if I can't find booties to put on my shoes? What if I can't find gloves? Well, I think you can, but you know, you make your best effort. But the seller is certainly going to say, well, the seller can say, I'm not letting you on my property unless you do have the mask and the gloves and the booties. It's sort of up to the seller, but you've done your job by pointing out these are what the rules are. This is what everyone's promising to do. So it's going to be one agent, 2 buyers, only 6 feet apart, don't touch anything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you look at number 7, that's applicable to the people who are entering the property, the buyer, buyers, agents, inspectors, appraisers, and the seller. Everyone is saying when they sign this form that I'm not sick. As far as I know, I haven't been in contact with anyone who's sick, and I don't have any symptoms. Now, of course, sometimes people don't know for sure if they're sick or not, and that's understood. It says below that everyone understands I'm assuming the risk of doing this. And it also says on there that it's not the realtor's job to verify that everybody is telling the truth. You're just doing the best you can. You're getting everyone to sign the form and make sure the seller cleans the property. What if the seller doesn't clean the property? It's not your fault. You told them it's their job to do it. Buyers, people ask me, whose responsibility is to supply the gloves and the mask? Well, it's the people entering the property who are supposed to supply it. But what if someone shows up to see the house and they don't have gloves or a mask? If you want to, listing agent, you can keep a supply for there and you can give it to them. You don't have to. You can just tell them, hey, you're supposed to have a mask. Go get a mask. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not but it's the person who's doing it who's supposed to supply the stuff. But if they don't do it, then you can help them out if you want to. It's not your job to help them out, but you can if you want to. Obviously, you know what else this means? This means you can't just have a lockbox on the property where anybody can come in if they have a lockbox key and just show the property. Because then how are you going to make sure that the person who's entering the property is following the protocols? Plus, you want to collect this form from anyone who's entering the property. Now, the form was just tweaked today, so I think the version we're looking here is not the totally updated version. Yeah, I can just see it at the very bottom on the updated version. It's going to make clear that, you know something? Some people say, do I have to do a new form every single time I enter the property? And the answer is, what we're saying on the updated version is, you could, as a buyer, you can just sign one of these forms today. And any property you go on to today, you can use the same form, but you have to give a copy of that form to the listing agent of each property. But then tomorrow, if you come back to the same house, you should get a new one of these. So you should always have a new one of these dated on the day you're entering the property. You don't need one for each property as long as you don't, as long as you give one to the listing agent each time, okay? Does the listing agent have to give one of these that's signed by the seller and the listing agent to the buyer if they want one? I mean, you don't have to, but the buyer's agent and the buyer definitely have to give one to the listing agent each time they come onto the property. Same rules for inspectors, same rules for appraisers, same rule for everybody. Can the buyer and the buyer's agent sign the same form? Well, I mean, if you look at the form, it's really supposed to be like two buyers, they each sign it. But if you want to try to squeeze the buyer and the buyer's agent all in the same form under paragraph 9, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's nothing illegal. That means that everyone's agreeing when they sign it that they're following the rules and they're not sick. And then at the very bottom, remember, you're going to give a copy to the agent and the agent can initial it, right? To acknowledge that you received a copy. You always want to give a copy to the listing agent. Do you have to give a copy to the buyer's agent if you're the buyer? It can't hurt. I mean, the important thing though is that the listing agent gets a copy of these things, okay? So these are the real important two forms: the listing, the RLA CAA, which you can use for sale listing and a lease listing, and then this form, the PEAD, and there's also a form called the PEAD LR. It's the same form. It's the same form for rentals. You don't have to pull it up. If you, yeah, see, it's basically the same form, except the terminology is landlords and tenants and property managers as opposed to buyer and seller. But this, in other words, the rules are the same, okay? Now, the next form I want to talk about is a form called the CVA. Now, this is not a mandatory form. Ron Durham, I'll just see your question real quick. Yes, you can sign this form electronically. Anyway, the CVA form, look at the CVA form. You know what this form is? This is not mandatory, but this is a form where the buyer and seller can anticipate problems. You know, we're in a new world right now, and sometimes things are taking longer than normal. Sometimes the loan process takes longer, the appraisal process takes longer, the inspection process takes longer. Sometimes it takes time to get a notary to come out to the property because you can't do virtual notaries in California, unfortunately. You can pretty much do drive-by appraisals now. But anyway, the point is, or maybe in the middle of escrow, the buyer gets sick, or one of their relatives gets sick, or the seller gets sick, or maybe the seller or the buyer loses their job in the middle of escrow, or whatever. Something happens. By using this form, if you look at paragraph 4, everyone can agree that you can automatically extend the time for the buyer to remove the contingencies or extend the time for the buyer or seller to close. In other words, let's say I'm the buyer, you're the seller, and we sign this form and I check the box in paragraph 4B and A. That means we both agree that if something happens because of an unforeseen coronavirus circumstance, like the things I was talking about, that we are automatically agreeing to an extension. It could be 30 days, we could put more days, less days. And we're agreeing if the buyer can't remove their contingencies, because of something happened, we'll give them another 30 days or so. What happens after the 30 days? Look at paragraph 4A. After the 30 days and the buyers still can't remove their contingencies because of the coronavirus. Then what does it say? It says either party can cancel and the buyer gets their deposit back. Some sellers aren't going to like that. Some sellers aren't going to want to sign this form because they don't like that, in which case you don't have the form. Or look at 4B. What if everybody agrees that sometimes things are going to happen that delay the close of escrow? So we agree to a 30-day extension. That means if something happens, we both agree to a 30-day extension. What happens after 30 days and I still can't close? Well, you see what it says there? You check a box. Either party can cancel. Either buyer's deposit shall be returned or buyer's deposit released to seller. Of course, the buyer wants the deposit returned. The seller wants it released to the seller. So maybe they're not going to be able to agree to this form because they can't agree. Hopefully they are going to agree. And then number 5 is, let's say buyer and seller agree that if something goes wrong, we agree to mutually cancel. So you can check that box. And that means if something goes wrong, both sides, forget the extension, we're just canceling. Now, there's a form that goes with this called the NUCC, because by signing that, the form we just looked at, the buyer and seller are, let's say I'm the buyer, you're the seller. We're saying if something happens, I'm going to tell, if something happens to me, I'm going to tell you. If something happens to you, you're going to tell me. And once you tell me what happened, that automatically triggers that extension. So here's the form I'm talking about, the notice of unforeseen coronavirus circumstance. Let's say you're the buyer, I'm the seller. We've agreed to that CVA. And now here we are in escrow. And all of a sudden, I'm experiencing a delay with the review appraiser. So I'll check the box under A1. Or I'm experiencing a delay with the notary. I'll check that box. Or under B, the movers are not going to be ready on time. Or the termite guy is slow. Or the appraisal's slow. Or number C, I got sick. Or I'm under quarantine. In other words, so if one of these things happens to me, I'm the buyer, I check the relevant box, I send it to you, the seller, and once you get it, that kicks in the extension we agreed to on the previous form. And we have a form of this for rentals too. We have the CVA-LR, LR, which applies to, let's say, a landlord and a tenant, right? Yeah, the landlord and the tenant, we've signed the lease, right? But the tenant hasn't moved in yet. And then, so by filling out this form, we can basically say under number 4, we agree that if something happens related to COVID-19 and either the tenant notifies the landlord or the landlord notifies the tenant on the NUCC-LR, then there's an automatic extension of the time to occupy. Or you can just agree to cancel the whole lease. So in other words, these forms I'm just talking about here, you don't have to use them, but it's helpful to anticipate these problems. Well, here's a question for you. What if we don't use these forms, right? We don't use the CVA, we don't use the NUCC, we just have a regular purchase contract. And then halfway through the contract, the buyers remove their contingencies and all of a sudden they get laid off from their job because of COVID-19. But you haven't used these forms. Okay, and the buyer says, well, you know, I lost my job, I can't close. The question is, if that happens, do they get their money back or does the seller keep their deposit? What does the law say if we don't use these forms? Well, you know what? California Civil Code 1511, which is referred to as the Act of God law, says if you're in a contract and your performance under this contract is either delayed or prevented because of, the wording is, an irresistible superhuman cause. In other words, something completely out of your control, like an earthquake, like World War III, or like a pandemic, If that happens, you can get out of the contract. So the question is, are courts going to consider the current pandemic something that gives you the right to get out of your contracts without any consequence? We don't know. Probably, I'm thinking it depends on the circumstance. I mean, if the buyer just simply loses their job or gets sick, I'm thinking a court's probably going to say, yeah, you can get out of the deal. Here's your money back. What if the buyer says, well, I haven't lost my job, but I'm worried about my job. I'm uncertain, so I just want to cancel for that reason after removing their contingencies. What's a court going to say? Well, in that case, a court's might say, well, too bad for you. You're going to lose your deposit. My point is, we could wait for the judge to decide, or we can use these forms we have to try to anticipate the problem and sort of try to resolve it up front if you'll want to. You don't have to, it's a suggestion, okay? So let me now talk about the last two forms. And the first one is the NTAP. For the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about the rental situation in California. Number one, right now, all of us in California are under an eviction moratorium. You know what that means? That means if the tenant cannot pay their rent, and the reason is related to COVID-19. They're sick, they lost their jobs, they have to take care of somebody, whatever. If that's the reason you're not paying your rent, and good news is most people did pay their rent on April 1st, but not everybody. And we're concerned that in May 1st, a lot of other people aren't going to pay their rent. The point is, it's not that you don't have to pay your rent, it's just that the landlord cannot evict you for not paying your rent if the reason you're not paying their rent is related to COVID-19. So the form we're looking here, this is the form the landlord sends to the tenant, sort of opening a dialogue, sort of telling the tenant that tenants are protected temporarily if they can't pay their rent because they lost money related to COVID-19. Is this a required form? No. Should I send this to every tenant I have? I don't think so. You know who I'm going to send this to? The tenants of mine who don't pay their rent. Because I'm telling them, okay, yeah, but you still have to notify me, tenant, if you're unable to pay the rent, and you have to prove it. And it also points out on this form, you're educating your tenant. You know, some tenants think, oh, great, I don't have to pay the rent for 2 months. No, the rent is not forgiven. It's just they cannot evict you for not paying it if that's the reason. So this is, you're going to educate your tenant. And now, of course, the tenant needs to respond to you, telling you why they're not paying their rent. And that's the last form I want to talk about today. And that form is called the RPD. And the RPD stands for Rent Payment Delay. So let's say my tenant's not paying the rent. So number one, they're telling me why they're not paying it for April or May or some other month. And they're telling me, you know, am I sending it by email, whatever. Number two, the tenant has to tell me why they're not paying, layoff, sickness, whatever. Number three, they have to provide me with documentation, like a note from their boss laying them off or note from a doctor, whatever. And number four, the tenant's basically saying, this is how much rent I owe and this is how much I'm paying, zero, whatever. And number five is interesting. Look at that. You can sort of structure a repayment plan. Now, remember what I said. This is a 2-month eviction moratorium. So after it's over, the tenant still has to pay you back all the rent they didn't pay. Well, what if they couldn't, what if 2 months are gone and they're still laid off? They still can't afford, you know, to pay the rent. Well, as of now, the eviction moratorium is only till May 31st. It might get extended to like June 30th. We don't know yet. But as of now, starting on June 1st, you could evict the tenant and they got to pay you all the back rent. Unless you live in certain cities. If you live in the city of Los Angeles, for example, and the tenant doesn't pay their rent because of a COVID-19 reason, they don't have to pay you the back rent for 6 months. If they're in LA County, it's for 12 months. So, I mean, the state law says you got to pay all of your back rent by June 1st unless it gets extended. But I don't know if there's any cities where you are, near where you are, Redlands or whatever, that have their own special local rules addressing this. If you're curious, you can call our legal hotline and we can look it up for you to see if your city has any special rules on this. LA, for example, you know what else Los Angeles has right now? A rent freeze. In LA City, not only can you not evict someone, not only do they have 6 months to pay you back, but you can't raise their rent by 1 penny, whether you're under rent control or not. So as I said, there are cities and counties throughout the state that have their own special rules. I think you guys are mainly not in Los Angeles County. You're, San Bernardino or Riverside or whatever. And that I don't think it has the same rules, but we could check for you if you want to. So it gets complicated, right? But I haven't told you the most interesting thing. The worst thing for landlords is even when the eviction moratorium is over, or you still cannot evict anyone in California for any reason at all until August 1st, because the courts are closed in California for evictions until then. So in other words, even if it's got nothing to do with COVID-19, maybe you're selling a house, right? And the tenant, so you want to give the tenant a 60-day notice to leave because you're selling the house to the buyer and the buyer doesn't want to keep that tenant. Does that tenant have the right to stay? Absolutely not. So you give them a 60-day notice. 60 days go by and the tenant says, I'm not leaving. I don't want to leave. So you have to leave. I just gave you a note. No, I'm not leaving. Well, can you evict them? Legally, you have the right to evict them, but the courts are closed. They're not closed for everything, but they're closed for unlawful detainers. So you're not going to be able to get them out till at least August 1st, unless they open it up sooner. You know what you could do? You could say to that tenant, though, hey, if you don't leave, you may cause me a loss. You may cause me to lose this sale. That's going to cost the seller money. That's going to cost the buyer money. It's going to cost me money. So we're going to sue you for all the money we're losing because of what you're doing. And you can do that. You can threaten to sue them. You can actually sue them. But you can't get them out. You can't legally evict them until the courts start taking unlawful detainers again, which as of now is August 1st. Okay, so very complicated situation with rental properties right now, but that's what we all got to deal with right now. And these things are changing every day, so just stay tuned, okay? You know what else is going on? Foreclosures. There's a moratorium on foreclosures. Ron asking NTAP for commercial rentals also. Good question. You don't have to, because commercial aren't covered under the eviction moratorium, but commercial is covered under the court closure. So, I mean, commercial tenants don't have these rights, but if they don't leave, you're not going to be able to evict them. Okay. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. What about foreclosures? Let's say you borrow money from Wells Fargo or Citibank or California Savings Bank or California Credit Union, and all of a sudden you don't make your mortgage payment this month. They can't foreclose on you. Does that mean you don't owe the money? No, you definitely owe the money, but they just can't foreclose on you. How long does that last? Till June 23rd. What happens on June 24th? They can foreclose on you, and they can also foreclose on you for all the money, the back payments. You know what I mean? It's not like you don't have to make your mortgage payments. It's just they can't foreclose on you until June 24th for that reason. But that's if you have a direct loan with a lender. But if you have an FHA loan secured by your real property, a VA loan, or just a regular conforming loan that's serviced by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, for those loans, you know what else? It's not just a foreclosure moratorium. There's foreclosure forbearance. You know what that means? That means, let's say you get laid off for 3 months, right? And you can't make your mortgage payment for 3 months. And then the foreclosure moratorium ends. Well, you don't owe those 3 months yet. You can add on those 3 months. You don't have to pay for those 3 months until 12 months from now. You see what I'm saying? So you can sort of delay payment of those 3 payments. On a direct loan, that's not the case, but on a federally insured or guaranteed or serviced loan, you still owe the money, but you don't owe the money right now. So they can't basically foreclose on you right now for the payments that you missed, if the payments you missed were caused by COVID-19. You see what I'm saying? So that's another thing we're dealing with now. Speaking of delays, I got good news for you. The Department of Real Estate has some delays too. Let's say your license is due to be renewed on June 1st. Well, you know what? Now your deadline is September 1st. Well, 60 days. 60 days from June 1st is like, I don't know, July 31st, whatever it is. All DRE deadlines have a 60-day extension if the deadline occurs prior to July 14th. If your deadline is July 20th, that's still your deadline. If your deadline is July 10th, your new deadline is September 10th. You see what I'm saying? So DRE has extended deadlines for any deadline that occurs before July 14th. You know what else? The DRE is not having testing right now for new licensees. 1031 exchanges are also extended. You know, that's when you exchange one income property for another income property or commercial property for a commercial property. And you can do a delayed exchange, right? If I got a commercial property and I want to defer taxes on it, I can sell it today, and then I got 45 days to identify a replacement property and 180 days to close on the purchase of the replacement property. Well, if any of you or your clients are currently in that process, you've sold the first one, but you haven't bought the replacement, and you have a deadline coming up, either the 45-day or the 180-day, that deadline is all automatically extended to July 15th. Now, if you go into a new 1031 exchange today, it's the normal deadlines, okay? Anything else you really need to know? You know the purchase contract, the RPA contract, your favorite contract, it's 10 pages long. A few years ago, it was 8 pages long. 15 years ago, it was 6 pages long, or 20 years ago. When I started, it was 2 pages long. Well, did you know this year there was going to be a big modification to the purchase contract, and it was going to become 15 pages long? Well, you'll be happy to know that that's been postponed till December 2021. So you're not going to have to worry about learning a new purchase contract this year. That's one less thing to worry about, okay? People ask about property taxes. No, those were not extended at all. People asking about disclosure. Here's a good question. You're selling a house and the seller is sick with COVID-19. Do you have to disclose that to the prospective buyer? Definitely. What if the seller says that's a privacy issue? You can't tell them. No, it's a contagious disease. You have to tell them. But here's a good question. How about this? How about 3 months from now, you're selling a house and the seller or the tenant who lives there, they got sick with COVID-19, but they recovered. Most people recover, right? Do you have to disclose to a prospective buyer that the previous occupant of the property had COVID-19, but they don't have it anymore? The answer to that question, of course, we don't know for sure, but all the attorneys I work with and all the attorneys I speak to out there, we all sort of agree that we think the courts are going to declare that to be a material fact. So you should have to disclose it. We're going to try to get a law passed that makes that specific, but right now that's the answer we're getting, okay? Last thing I want to talk about real quick is, let me see, before I do that, let's see if there's any questions I can get here. Yes, Colleen, buyer's agent should also fill out the PAD form. Yes, the PAD form can be signed electronically, NTAP not for commercial. Do they charge interest on those 3 payments? I mean, just, in other words, just the normal interest, not like a penalty fee or anything like that. Anyway, here's one more thing I want to talk to you about. Listen to this. Today, Tuesday, April 28th, about 3 hours ago or 2 hours ago, they finally opened up the process where realtors can apply for something called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA. Traditionally, as you know, as a realtor, you're an independent contractor, you're not eligible for unemployment. Well, you are now. You're eligible for unemployment through the PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, retroactive back to February 2nd, and you could get as much as $737 per week for up to 39 weeks, sometimes even longer, if you qualify. Well, how do I know if I qualify? Well, you're going to apply. It's going to be based on your income and the loss of income you've experienced. We have people standing by to talk to you. We have a hotline, the Realtor Relief Hotline, and the phone number is 213-351-8450. I'll put it in the chat. 213-351-8450. Now, of course, everybody is calling today. So it may take a while to get through today. We got like 20 people on the phone. They're going to be on the phone till 8 o'clock tonight. Be patient and get through, or you can send an email and they'll respond by email to you. And there's also a website called, it's a microsite from C.A.R. It's car.org/coronavirus. And there are a lot of FAQs there that will help you. We're also going to, if we haven't done it already, we're going to post the actual application itself. The application just came out this morning. See, thanks, Annette. See the FAQs there? There they are. They're updating them today as we speak. So we didn't know until today what the actual application is going to look like. And apparently it's probably not up there. It's, as soon as we get it, it's going to be up there. The point is, we have questions here, questions and answers. Check it out. Call that number, email. They will help you. Their attorneys have the answers there. Some of my attorneys are on that hotline. Some other attorneys are on that hotline. Check it out. You can even, while you're on hold, you can read this stuff, whatever you want to do. We're going to help you. Everyone's going to get help. We're going to help you with this program to see if you're eligible for it. Now, there's 2 other programs that realtors can also apply for to get money. The first one is something called PPP, Payroll Protection Program. This is either a broker or an agent. You can apply for a forgivable loan, means you don't have to pay it back. The money is, but you have to, basically it's replacing sort of 2 months worth of income. You have to use the money by July 1st. If you're a broker, you can use it to pay your expenses like mortgage, rent, utilities. If you're an agent, you can use it to replace income over a 2-month period compared to last year. And you don't have to pay the money back. I mean, there's limited how much you're going to get. You have to use the proceeds by July 1st. It's forgivable, but you may have remember they ran out of money the first time through. Then they signed, on Thursday, the president signed a bill to put more money in the program. I've heard rumors it may be gone already. Anyway, you can apply if you think that's the best bet for you. And you can call that number I gave and they can talk about that. Another alternative is something called, and by the way, you apply for that through your lender. Now, if you, another program they have is called EIDL on that same place, and that was showing on that website, economic injury disaster loans. Let's say you want to borrow more money than just to cover 2 months. You need more money than that. You can pay it back over 30 years, 3.75% interest, and you can use that for your expenses, your business expenses, whatever the expenses those are. And you're also eligible for a grant, which is free money up to $10,000. Now, if you're an independent contractor, you only can get a $1,000 grant. If you're the broker and you have people working for you, it can be up to $10,000. So that might be a good program, or the PPP, or the first one I talked about, the PUA. How do I know which is the first one? Which was the best one for me? Well, that's why you're going to call that phone number. That's why you might talk to your own accountant or advisor. To me, I think a lot of people, the PUA is going to be the best one, because you know what's good about that one? They're not going to run out of money. They're not going to run out of money for the unemployment. Of course, you only get the money while you're not making money. Hopefully in a month or two from now, you're going to be doing deals like you did before. And obviously, if you're closing transactions, you're not going to get the unemployment. You see what I'm saying? So you're going to figure this out for yourself. But the point is, you should be able to be eligible for a program. Call the number, check it out, and they'll be able to help you with that. Okay? I'm not the expert on that, so don't even ask me specific questions. That's why we have experts. Kristen Hamilton, what's the email? I don't even know exactly. I think when you call that number, they prompt you and say if you just want to email your question in, you can just email it in. And also, while you're waiting on hold, they can text you information, or you can just go to the website and read the information. You can pull up a copy of the application itself, so you can look at it while you're waiting. It's all online. Everything's going to be done online. Obviously, the EDD is overwhelmed this morning, but I'm pretty sure in a day or so that it's going to slow down a little bit, and you should be able to get through and do it. Okay. So, any questions you want to ask me on any of this, other than the questions you've already asked me on this legal stuff? Feel free. You can call the legal hotline with questions. I don't think there are going to be any more forms. That's it. I told you all the COVID forms, no more COVID forms. So now you know what you need to know about the forms. You need what you need. I told you about the eviction rules. I told you about the foreclosure rules. I told you about the DREs extension. I told you about 1031 extensions. Another extension, on some refis you do right now, you don't have to get the appraisal till 120 days after closing. So a lot of things are sort of being extended. The purchase contract, the new one's not going to come out till December 2021. Eventually, all of this stuff's going to go away, and eventually you're not going to be thinking about these forms or these moratoriums or these forbearances. Eventually, things are going to change, but it might be a gradual process. It may be county by county. I wouldn't be surprised, to tell you the truth, even when things are open up, let's say June or July, that for real estate, they're still going to say, well, for the time being in real estate, you should still follow the safe practices, one agent plus 2 buyers at a time. Everybody wear a mask, everybody wear gloves, don't touch anything. I mean, it's possible, right? Thanks, Annette. There's the email, COVID relief hotline at CAR.org. Annette is so helpful, isn't she? That's in answer to your question, Kristen, COVID relief hotline at CAR.org. Email your questions, call the number. If you email, the attorneys will be right there responding to you. I have certain people designated to respond to emails, certain people to phone calls. Sometimes email actually works better if you can articulate your question well enough. Claudia has a good question. What about showings at a vacant house? Can the buyer's agent be responsible? Well, unfortunately, under the law, it is the seller's responsibility to make sure that the best practices are being followed. You can't really delegate that to the buyer's agent, which means you can't really have the lock boxes where anybody can just show up anytime they want. Because how else are you, the listing agent, going to make sure that they gave you the form and followed the best practices? So Jim Knudsen, what if the buyer's agent or buyer will not sign it? Well, I'd be reluctant necessarily to work with those type of people, because I'd ask, well, why aren't you signing? Are you hiding something from me? Are you sick? Have you been in contact with 6 people? Are you going to start touching everything without gloves on? Why aren't you signing the form? I mean, you don't have to sign the form. I want you to promise you're going to follow these safe practices. And the whole idea of the form is you're promising to file safe practices. You know what else is good? When the buyer signs that form, they are assuming the risk. So they can't come back later and say, well, I went on your property and I got sick because the seller didn't wipe it down. Well, if they sign the PEAD, they assume that risk. And if that actually happens, there's nothing, they can't go back to you and do that. Christine, should the seller sign the PEAD even if the home is vacant? Well, that's a good question. If the seller's just not there, right? If they're not even there, then they're obviously nothing to tell you, it's not an issue of them being sick or something like that. But you know what? If I'm the seller, the reason I would still want if I'm the buyer, the reason I still want the seller to sign that, because I want the seller to be promising me that they're going to wipe down the property after each showing. I know what you're thinking. What if the seller lives in Texas? Well, guess what, listing agent? It's now your responsibility to make sure that the buyers sign the form and you wipe down and clean and disinfect the property. Do I know when the DRE, so far the DRE has not said when they're going to start testing again for new agents. My impression is it's going to be pretty soon, but I don't know yet. Okay. 2 of you asked that same question. Good, Maria and Brenda. Any more questions? I guess you can either raise your hand and Tanya's asking a question. Tanya, will that form have 4 signature lines, 2 for buyers, 2 for sellers? I think you really want the buyers to sign their form and the sellers to sign their form, because they're both saying, I guess theoretically everyone sign the same form, but that's not the idea. Because remember, buyers should be signing a form every day they go into the property. So if buyer comes into the property today, they sign one. If they come in tomorrow, they sign a fresh one. The seller doesn't have to sign a fresh one every day. The seller really only has to disclose if their health situation changes. But buyers, every single day, that they're going to be going on to properties or inspectors, they should be signing a new PEAD for that day. Georgette asked, do I know when the money will be available for the EIDL loans? Good question. They might know on the other hotline. It was supposed to be already available, but I have understood that it's not right now. Supposedly any day now, Call those people. They'll know more they'll have really up-to-date information, or send them an email at that number Annette posted, COVID relief hotline at C.A.R.org. Yeah, today is D-Day for that. Believe me, this is the big day when it all starts with the PUA.
Gov, the DRE website says April 30th. I'm assuming they're going to extend the exam dates, but that's the last notice we have received, is they are closed until April 30th.
Who knows? Maybe they are. Maybe they're going to start at the end of the month doing tests again. Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised if they got extended. By the way, they have a brand new commissioner now. They just got appointed a commissioner right in the middle of the COVID relief. So you have to stop breaking the law now. The commissioner's in town, okay?
I believe we may have missed a few questions in the very beginning. I'm gonna, can you scroll up and just make sure?
Yes. All right. Yeah, no, I think I got them.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're all covered.
I think I got them all.
Great. Of course you did.
Of course. And you know what? I'm going to make a mistake here, but I'm going to actually put my email address here that you can all email me. Now, Annette has my cell phone, but she's not allowed to give that to anybody. So if I get a call on my cell phone, I'll know it's Annette's fault. And she'll be in big trouble because she's not allowed to give that out. But the rest of you can email me anytime. Carlene has a question. Do you need to get the PAD from prior showings? Remember, as a listing agent, you should be collecting the PEAD from everybody. I mean, if you weren't doing it at the beginning, you don't have to go back and get it. But starting now, yeah, you should just keep all the PEADs from everyone who comes onto the property. If you didn't do it when it first started, that's okay. But going forward, do that. Okay?
Awesome. Do we have any further questions for Gov before we end the meeting?
Thank you, everybody. I can't wait to see you in person, whenever that is. Hopefully not too
soon.
long. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks again, Gov, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Again, if
Hey,
you have
bye,
any
everybody.
questions, feel free to contact the Realtor Relief Hotline. And then you can also reach out to Gov via email for any questions that you may have.
Absolutely. Sherry Gillette, which email are you referring to, mine or the COVID relief? The COVID relief is, Annette put it up, the COVID relief hotline at car.org. And my email is govh@car.org. And I'm going to say goodbye.
Awesome.
Bye,
Thanks, Gov.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, President Herrera, for a great session again.
Definitely. Thank you for pulling up all those forms for us.
Yeah. I will see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Stay safe.